once you make your way to a 121 carrier, it's a little different. It's a different setting. You're working with professional pilots.
So you can like yell at them and make them cry and and get paid to do it.
Well, occasionally, if it's required.
So let's start from the beginning here. Let's just talk for some of our listeners maybe aren't really familiar with the whole structure of what a check airman is. Can you just talk a little bit about what they are? Do you work for the FAA? Do you work for the airline? Like, well, how does that all set up?
Well, technically, you're employed by the airline. And there are different types of check airmen. The type that I am is the one that's in the airplane. So I am in the aircraft. I fly with the new guys. I also go out and do routine checks on those who are currently online and out there flying routinely. We also have check airmen that are in the simulator. So when you first get assigned to an aircraft and you go through the classes in the schools, and then you have to get into the simulator and you have to learn how to fly it. You learn with the trainers in there, and then when you're finished, you take a test with a simulator check airman, which is similar, although different. What I do, I don't do anything in the simulator. I've chosen not to. I think the airplane is where it's fun, where the good stuff's at. But yeah, I'm out there. They got someone brand new, and they sent them to me. So I'm there when the new guy or girl is doing her or his first landing in an Airbus, while I'm sitting there watching them do it, and they got 100 and something people in the back who have no clue.
So what's that called when you get the fresh guy out of school? He just passes typewriter in the simulator and he shows up.
Well, that's called initial operating experience.
So yeah, abbreviated IOE.
Yeah, IOE, initial operating experience. The idea is you've already been taught how to fly the airplane. Now you're going to show up and put yourself in the operation for the airline that you're now employed with, and you're going to be dealing with all the real world around you. You've got your flight attendants, you've got your ground ops, your mechanic, you got a unruly passenger who's throwing punches in the aisle, or just stuff like that. Dispatch is calling. You hit a bird. What are you going to do about it? Stuff like that. Now you got to figure out how you're going to get through life that day instead of just sitting in a computer box.
Yeah, we all know the difference between the training environment and real world is fairly significant. Yeah. So, usually the engines aren't lighting on fire and failing at V1 and everything else, but
no, not so much.
You do have other curveballs. So, I've always been curious about this. So, I guess at this level, when you're flying a large, airliner, the main source of your pilots are coming from three different disciplines.
Yes.
You get a guy coming who's been a corporate pilot. Say, for this example, a guy's been a corporate pilot the whole time, never had a stint at the regionals or whatever. Then you got a guy that came, has been flying at the regionals for a long time in the 121 environment. And then you have guys fresh out of the military. So when those guys show up at IOE, what are the differences? I mean, I'm sure every pilot's different. We all get it. But if you could kind of categorize each of those and what you see, I think that would be really interesting.
Yes, this is very easy for me to stereotype the different types because I've seen hundreds of these. So it's really easy for me. We'll start with the corporate fellas. They're in a very different operation where you're out there and you're running the show. If something needs to be done, you're kind of the one that's in charge of getting that done. So I like to think of these types more as cowboys. Something needs to be done, and a lot of times they just kind of jump up and do it, or they might do it differently than what's expected. And when you try and correct them or bring them back from it, they give you this look like, "What's the big deal? I'm getting it done." But of course, you have to say, well, that's just not how we do it here. Because you're working at a 121 airline. They have a manual. They're like, we want it like this. Really, just don't break from this script. And that's a little bit difficult for them. And a lot of them sometimes are a single pilot in some situations.
Oh, I didn't even consider that. Yeah.
So, the
CRM sometimes is a little...
Yeah, they're a lot of times they're just right up there ready to just do everything by themselves instead of embracing that to a pilot situation. The military guys, they're kind of almost hilarious sometimes. They're usually a really good stick. I want to certainly prop them up. They're really good on the aircraft. They can fly it really well. But when it comes to operating like the radios
especially in a high density environment,
in America, right? Their communications with the military is very, very different. They say some very unique things that when you hear them saying them on the radio, you're going to think, what are you saying right now? Nobody understands what you're trying to say. And so you're trying to give them new terminology to use that they haven't been using in their career in the military. And so they sound like a total beginner, like private pilot. But, a year later, they sound
Yeah.
like the rest of us, not a big deal, but you're dealing with that while you're trying to immerse them in that new environment. And as far as the regional pilots, they've kind of already been doing it, just usually smaller airplanes.
Yeah, it's got to be the easiest transition.
Yeah.
You have to think.
They're the easiest, they're the youngest, so they usually adapt pretty quick, pretty well. They have understandings of things like dealing with larger airports, going in and out of O'Hare or something, no big deal. You will find, though, that they're usually younger. And this day and age, in 2019, it's a different time than, say, 10, 15 years ago when things moved slower. So you've got some really young guys.
Like, what's the youngest dude that you've given IOE to? I mean, roughly.
Or dudette.
23 or 4. For real.
Wow.
Yeah. Very, very fresh and young. And so...
Did you get him a booster seat?
Not this
Was
time.
his mother on the jump seat when you guys...
Did she pack him a lunch?
I didn't ask, but I should have. But, sometimes when these guys are really young, they come up real fast. They have really high expectations, almost like it's something that they've deserved. Here they are at this airline already so fast. And you kind of have to almost slow them down. And I don't want to say they're coming across as cocky, but things move faster for them than maybe a lot of the rest of us experienced. And so they are expecting things from their employer and from the industry that they're now a part of. And sometimes they get a little anxious.
So when you have to stroll up in your cowboy boots and put your arm around and be like,
Let me tell you something
all
about
right, pal,
aviation.
let me tell you a couple things here.
I might not be the cowboy boots guy. No Oakleys either.
So, yeah, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit before, but at the airlines, the first time you actually fly an airplane almost always is a live revenue leg with passengers on board. So that's got to be a balance for you, where you're ultimately running the show. You're keeping an eye on someone that has very little experience, plus trying to operate an on-time, safe airline flight. What's the learning curve as a check airman to be able to do that?
There is some time involved. And I remember the way I felt in the very beginning, and the way I handled things was very different back then. It takes at least 6 months to a year till you finally get your groove. You can look back on the mistakes you made early on, and you can kind of wish you could take them back, but there's no way to.
That's the way it is, yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. You've got someone showing up there day one. They've never flown the plane. You're the only one that has, and nobody else knows.
How many times have you got in a situation where you've actually had to intervene on the controls?
Not many, as people would think. I probably have close to 4,000 hours of actually sitting with someone doing operating experience like we're talking about here. There's been a few. Oftentimes you will maybe touch the controls a little bit to assist, but you usually don't have to totally take the controls from somebody.
You do IOE with captains too, right?
Yes, both. So you are qualified in every seat in the flight deck.
Those guys obviously have been around, so there's no worry usually on helping out with a landing. Because the problem is, though, isn't the Airbus where, that's independent moving sticks on each side, right? You could push left, he could push right.
Yes, but if you use them both at the same time, they add together.
Oh, really? So the captain's doesn't automatically...
No, there is an override button on both sides, so you can override the other one. But the thing is, you're trying to generalize the captains. Maybe they had more time. That's not necessarily the case.
Well,
in fact, one of my best stories was I had a new hire at our airline. He came from another airline. This guy had a lot of experience. Now, according to him, he had at least 10,000 hours in the Airbus, which he's currently being trained, which at the time was way more than myself. And he even claimed to have been, and it seems to be true, he was a vice president of flight operations at the carrier that he came from that is now defunct.
Imagine that.
Yes. So he's
great. I mean, if you've ever been in an airline, you're in trouble when you're flying with a management pilot. That's like,
well,
trip.
I took the controls from this guy
on landing.
Yes, he was very unstable, very high, very fast. And I said, okay, let's go around. And he tried to fight me on it. He's like, no, I could do it.
Oh boy.
And he keeps going. I'm like, no, okay, let's go around. We'll come around and try this one more time. And go around is, of course, not do the landing. You're going to continue forward, go back up, and return and try and land again. But he continued to argue with me to the point where I had to say, okay, all right, my controls. And I took the control of the airplane and flew it out and got got alongside the airport again, where I went ahead and handed the aircraft back. I said, "Are you ready to try again?" And he was very upset.